and we saw bodies either leaping or falling from the upper floors, and it was just a chilling scene. And a few minutes later, almost in a very surreal action, the second plane, and it actually, I could almost see that it was a United plane, I thought, just
that
smashed.
actually has been confirmed this evening.
It smashed right into the building, and people were just screaming and crying, and it was just, the fire just, started to explode.
Some of the police officials have said tonight that they were surprised about how orderly the evacuations were, not only from your two buildings. You'd expect those to be more orderly than those of the World Trade Center bombings, but that isn't exactly what you experienced on the street.
There was a little more panic on the street. For the most part, things were fairly organized once we got up to the West Side Highway, but there was just people grieving and crying, and some of the schools were being evacuated. There's a bit of panic there, but overall, I think people just needed to get north and just get out of the area.
You saw, as you said, the first attack. You also saw the second plane slam into the South Tower. You heard the mayor tonight say that they have reason to believe that people are still alive in that wreckage. Are either one of you that optimistic based on what you saw? You were very close.
It was very close, but I couldn't see. I left before I was able to escape the scene before the buildings actually fell. And so I don't know what it looked like after that point. People were still evacuating and had the opportunity to get out as I was getting out. So
most companies are advising people not to go to work tomorrow. All the public schools, private schools, parochial schools will be closed. As you wake up tomorrow morning, I'm sure you have no sense of what that day will be like that awaits you. But give us a preview of what you think it might be like.
Yeah, I mean, just walking down to getting off the subway and looking at the World Trade Center for basically the last 18 or 19 years, every day, it's just not there anymore. And walking up the West Side Highway, just turning around on a continuous basis, they were just not there anymore, and just seeing this bellowing smoke.
It is so eerie out there right now, and one of the things that I was impressed by today is that there was a plea made for people to donate blood. And I went late this morning to donate blood, and the lines were wrapped around the block. And I told at some hospitals there were 4- and 5-hour waits to donate blood. This does not surprise you, does it?
no, not at all. I mean, everyone has been so affected by this just immediately on the streets. As soon as I got home after the incident, everyone was glum and quiet on the streets. People stayed outside to see if they could get a view, but I mean, it was just complete quiet.
Well, Jennifer and Steve, we appreciate your dropping by. We know that not only has this been a very traumatic day for you, but as Senator Warner said earlier today, one of the worst days in American history. You're very lucky to be alive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right now, we're going to check in with Rose Arce, who is one of our producers who has basically been at Ground Zero most of the day. We find her right now at St. Vincent's Hospital, where several hundred people are being treated right now. Rose, give us an update if you would.
Yes, Paula, I'm actually right here on 8th Avenue, and right over my left shoulder, you would see the Twin Towers on any other night clearly, but tonight there's nothing. It's completely dark. I spent most of the day about 2 blocks from there on the top floor of a building that's just north of the World Trade Center. From there we could see people rushing to the windows as fire was billowing out of the top of the building where the first airplane hit. People were rushing to the windows. They were taking clothes. One thing looked like a blanket that they were waving, and then suddenly there was an explosion, and you saw folks start to jump out the front window of the building and plunge. I saw at least 6 people do this. Folks were pushing each other. Some people were screaming for help and then just falling out. There was chaos on the ground. You could see emergency workers rushing to the scene of the building. Right now it's pretty quiet behind me, but this is an emergency route right over here, 8th Avenue. It's a straight shot from the World Trade Center uptown, and we've been watching emergency vehicles rushing right by us into the hospital that's right up the street.
Rose, I want to make a clarification now. The police chief earlier reported that they believe there were people alive, and most people interpreted that as alive in the wreckage of the World Trade Center. The police commissioner is issuing clarifications that says they believe there are people alive in nearby buildings downtown, not the Trade Center. Once again, neither officials at the Pentagon or officials here in the city can confirm the magnitude of the tragedy witnessed here in New York City and in Washington today, but once again the mayor says the statistics will be horrendous and the number of deaths will be very, very high. It's time to go back to Washington now, and Wolf.
Thank you, Paula. We're getting some new information now from our Susan Candiotti in Miami. She's reporting that the FBI has begun the process, or will soon begin the process, of executing search warrants in more than one location in South Florida, including what she says are the homes and post office boxes of several individuals. This is in response, Susan Candiotti is reporting, to information gleaned from the investigation into today's terrorist attacks in New York and here in Washington. One source tells Susan this: we're looking at South Florida ties to some of the people we're looking at. That's because, she says, authorities are basing their investigation on the passenger manifests of these hijacked airliners, 4 of them today, and they're taking information from other sources as well. We'll be following this. One additional note, she says a search will also be done in Daytona, Florida. Susan Candiotti will be joining us shortly. I do want to report once again what she's saying, that the FBI has begun the process of search warrants in South Florida as well as Daytona. Susan is now on the phone with us. Susan, tell us, give us a perspective. What exactly do you know is going on?
It's my understanding, according to a law enforcement source, Wolf, that the FBI is in the process of executing search warrants. That is to say, in the process of putting the paperwork together. The execution of them may not begin until the morning or early morning hours. What they are going to be executing these search warrants are homes, as well as some may only be post office boxes, I am told. They are basing the information on the request for a search warrant on information coming from passenger manifests of the aircraft involved, among other information they have by talking to various other sources. I am told, quote, we are looking at South Florida ties to some of the people that we're looking at. When I asked if they are looking at names on the manifest that may only turn out to be passengers, I was told, no, we are basing our search warrants on more information than that. They are looking at more than one location, I am told, in South Florida, as well as other locations in Central and or North Florida, including Daytona Beach. Wolf?
Susan Candiotti in Miami, thank you very much. And our Jonathan Karl, our congressional correspondent, has been talking with members of Congress who also have been receiving intelligence briefings. John, tell us what you're hearing now.
Well, Wolf, I'm outside the Capitol Police headquarters here on Capitol Hill, where Attorney General and also the FBI Director have both been briefing about 75 members of Congress. I can tell you that in general, the one bit of information here is that they believe, according to the Attorney General told members of Congress, these were teams of 3 to 5 operating on each one of these planes, and that they believe that in each one of the cases where they have direct information, they were armed only with knives. Besides that, members of Congress I've spoken to that were in this briefing expressing frustration at the lack of information. They wanted to know, about the plane that went down outside of Pittsburgh. They wanted to know where was that plane's destination. They wanted to know more about the nationalities of those that were involved with this attack. And they said they got essentially no new information on any of that. But again, the one thing that they did get out of this was that, according to the Attorney General, what the Attorney General told the members of Congress here, those were teams of 3 to 5 operating on each one of those planes. Now, there will be another extraordinary briefing of law enforcement officials tomorrow at 12:30 on the floor of the House of Representatives, because every member of the House and Senate, for that matter, obviously wants to get briefed, wants to get these questions answered. So there will be a closed briefing on the floor of the House, we are told, tomorrow at 12:30 with law enforcement officials.
Jonathan Karl, so many questions and still so few answers. Thanks so much for joining us. And I want to bring in now the former UN ambassador, United States ambassador to the United Nations and Energy Secretary during the Clinton administration, Bill Richardson, who was one of the last high-ranking U.S. officials to actually go to Afghanistan and meet with Taliban leaders. He met with them in late 1997. And also Julie Surs, a former U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency analyst, a specialist on the Taliban and Afghanistan and Osama bin Laden. And first to you, Secretary Richardson, what is your sense right now, knowing the Taliban, knowing Osama bin Laden, hearing these reports, Do you believe that Osama bin Laden was responsible for this?
My gut feeling, Wolf, is yes, that every indicator, which is similar to the bombing of our 2 embassies, to the USS Cole, the modus operandi, the 3 to 5, that most likely it is Osama bin Laden. I believe that intelligence is also indicating that he's now in Afghanistan. If that is the case, I think this new policy makes sense, and that is that any nation that harbors such a terrorist would also be the beneficiary of a retaliatory effort by the United States. My view, again, is that the Taliban have been playing this game, that we contain him. When I met with them, they said he's not perpetrating any terrorist acts, he's under our control. That is not the case. He operates in a wide network throughout Afghanistan, other countries. I think it is critically important that if he is in Afghanistan, that he be turned over, that he be brought to a swift retaliatory effort.
Julie Sears, you're a former DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency analyst specializing in Afghanistan and the Taliban and Osama bin Laden. What's your take?
I agree with Ambassador Richardson and the other experts that I know you've had on throughout the day that, yes, all the indicators do seem to point to Osama bin Laden being responsible for this attack. And yes, I also agree with Ambassador Richardson that the Taliban, and as the President said, share at least equal responsibility in this act if that does turn out to be the case that bin Laden is behind it. Taliban officials have claimed after the 1998 embassy bombings, after the Cole attack, that bin Laden could somehow be controlled by them, and I think this shows, if anything, that they're working with him, that they're cooperating with him, that's perhaps even the best way to understand bin Laden's organization, that it includes not just bin Laden and this extremist network worldwide, but is very much helped by the safe haven the Taliban provide, and even by the assistance of some neighboring countries, including particularly Pakistan. I think it needs to be said now. It's something many of us American officials have believed, and private experts on the subject as well.
Well, let me ask Ambassador Richardson, do you believe Pakistan should share some of the responsibility if, in fact, Osama bin Laden is proven to have been responsible for these attacks?
Yes, there's no question that the Pakistanis have a lot of influence on the Taliban. When I visited the Taliban, it was arranged by the Pakistanis, who have a lot of leverage over them, territorial, financial. I think it's important that the international community rally behind the United States. NATO, nations like Pakistan, others that have influence with the Taliban in Central Asia. This should be an international responsibility. This is an attack on the international community, not just the United States. The United Nations needs to be involved. We need to have a multinational effort, but the United States should lead that. If they are the perpetrators, they should be the recipients. The Osama bin Laden organization, the whole network, of a very strong retaliatory strike.
All right, Ambassador Bill Richardson, Julie Sears, I want to thank both of you for joining us. We have to leave it right there. And Paula, before we go to you, just to recap the headline from our Jonathan Karl, reporting on a briefing that the Attorney General John Ashcroft gave members of Congress, that the U.S. government now believes teams of 3 to 5 individuals carrying knives commandeered those 4 airliners earlier today, destroying them and themselves in the process. Paula?
Thanks, Wolf. The city here is still paralyzed by the impact of the terrorist attacks here earlier today, and somewhat chilled by what the mayor of the city has just shared with us. He said he believes the fatality numbers will be horrendous, and that they will be, in quote, very high indeed. We do need to clarify one thing that the police commissioner told us was misinterpreted coming out of that news conference that he just held with the mayor. We were led to believe that police officials thought that there were people alive in the World Trade Center. That apparently is not the case. The police commissioner is now reiterating that he believes there are indeed people alive in nearby buildings downtown. Now, once again, to understand the impact of these two explosions. The crashes happened 18 minutes apart. Within an hour and a half, both the North Tower and the South Tower, the World Trade Center, had collapsed. An adjoining building collapsed at 6 o'clock tonight. There's a lot of debris in the area. Rescuers cannot get into the World Trade Center perimeter. We can confirm, though, 600 people are being treated in area hospitals. We're going to go to Greg Clarkin right now, who is at St. Vincent's Hospital, where a large number of those victims were taken. Greg?
Hi there, Paula. We are indeed very close to St. Vincent's Hospital, and this is one of the trauma and triage centers in Lower Manhattan. They tell us they have treated about 327 patients. They have 3 fatalities at St. Vincent's. Now, here to help us sort it out and describe what it was like inside St. Vincent's is Dr. Andrew Feldman. He's the chief of sports medicine, and he has been at work at St. Vincent's now for upwards of 10 hours. Doctor, can you give us some sense of the type of injuries we saw first off in St. Vincent's?
Well, there's a whole host of injuries, anything you'd see in any other kind of major trauma. Obviously a lot of broken bones, cuts and bruises, but a lot of blunt trauma, chest trauma, head trauma, things like that.
And what type of infrastructure, what type of system was in place to kind of deal with the influx of victims that we saw today?
Well, at St. Vincent's, we're a level 1 trauma center, which means we're prepared to do this type of stuff. We take care of a lot of accident victims in New York, and we have for many years. And I'm very proud of the staff and the other doctors in the facility for how they handled this. But basically, we are really set up for this type of environment.
Have they given you any kind of expectations, what's in store for you tomorrow? Any kind of heads up, any tips to what you might be in for?
It's basically more of the same, because obviously there's thousands and thousands of people to dig out, and all of them are going to have some sort of an injury, and basically, since we're so close to the World Center, that they'll be coming our way.
And the injuries will shift to a different type, correct, as they start to pull people out of here?
Well, I mean, the longer people are buried, I think the more severe the injury, and there's going to be a lot of smoke and gas inhalation, and people are going to be dealing with that in the next 12 to 24 hours, I believe.
Dr. Feldman, thanks very much for joining us. And Paula, that's the view of one gentleman who's inside St. Vincent's. Again, they've treated 327 people, 3 fatalities. Paula, back to you.
Thanks so much, Greg. We can confirm that there is a desperate plea for New Yorkers to donate blood, and every indication is that New Yorkers are doing their best to live up to that challenge. And there's some hospitals, lines wrapped around the block of people waiting in line to give blood. But indeed, there is still a shortage, and the city very much wants folks who are capable of donating blood to do just that. Right now, I'm going to check in with Susan Lasovich, who is out in Weehawken, New Jersey. Susan, if you would, try to set the scene for our viewers who weren't with us earlier today to help them understand, after the 2 towers crash, the drama of people trekking out of the city with roads closed around them, bridges closed, and how they made their way across the river to New Jersey.
Paula, it was just a surreal scene. Hoboken, New Jersey, which is where I live, is a very busy town that is directly opposite the financial district. You have buses, ferries going to the World Financial Center, which is across the street from where the World Trade Center once stood, and the PATH train, which runs underneath the Hudson River. The first stop in New York City is the World Financial Center. Instead, today, the ferries were transporting people who were fleeing for their lives. In fact, one of the cameramen that I worked with earlier today in Hoboken was just running, and they boarded the ferry. He doesn't live in New Jersey, but like many other people, just jumping onto the ferry just to get out of harm's way. The ferries were also used to transport victims as well of the smoke inhalation and other injuries. In fact, the PATH train entrance, of course no access to New York City, was a triage center. Dozens of ambulances from all over New Jersey treating people, all the hospitals in the area on standby. I went to the Lone Hospital, St. Mary's in Hoboken, as you mentioned. In New York City, people lined up around the block, a long line as well. People lining up, giving their names and phone numbers to donate blood. The hospital was just simply overwhelmed. They said normally they take 1 or 2 people to give blood. They just simply couldn't accommodate the many volunteers that were coming forth to try to lend their hand in any way. Just a surreal scene, Paula. Jet fighters overhead. I saw a fully outfitted SWAT team in the mayor's office in Hoboken, and that was offset by one of the most beautiful days of the year, spectacular Indian summer day. One person who was watching it with me said there's really not a cloud in the sky except for the huge billowing cloud of smoke that was coming over from the World Trade Center. Paula.
You described that beautifully, because as I stand here on this balcony tonight, it is one of those crystal clear nights and so eerie, because as I look over my shoulder where the World Trade Center once stood, there is nothing but a big black hole with smoke continuing to billow out of it. Susan, was there any sense of anger among the people you spoke with?
Oh, most definitely. But I think the overwhelming emotion is just one of shock. People were comparing it to Pearl Harbor earlier today. I think everyone recognized the magnitude of what happened. I was actually in the mayor's office in Hoboken when the building was collapsing. We had a perfect view of the building, and even while the mayor was planning this emergency of just unprecedented proportions, everybody's eyes were red-rimmed because they knew. Everybody knows somebody who got hurt. Everybody knows families of somebody who got hurt today in what we saw downtown Manhattan.
And I guess, Susan, it's this stage that we all shudder to think how many fatalities we may be facing in the days to come. Susan, thanks so much for that report.
Sure.
Before I go back to Bill Hemmer in Atlanta, just a very quick update. The mayor of the city confirming that the fatality numbers will be very, very high. One city official telling me on the phone into the thousands. People believed to be alive, trapped in buildings nearby what is left of the World Trade Centers. The mayor also confirming that tonight or earlier today, New York City not only lost its fire chief, but its deputy fire chief as well. The firefighters union confirming that 265 firefighters, those were among the first 400 first on the scene, are presumed dead. 85 police officers missing tonight. So, Bill, this is a city, as I said earlier this evening, is just beginning to grasp the magnitude of the tragedy that was endured here in this city today.
We're about 7 hours from sunup tomorrow, and indeed tomorrow the images are going to be much darker than we see tonight. Paula, thank you. Quite a bit of information to pass along to you at this point. Senior White House officials indicating to CNN the Air Traffic Control Center for the United States should be up and running tomorrow by noon Eastern time. We had been led to believe earlier today that this indeed would be the case. At this point, all air traffic in the United States for the first time in history has been shut down. But again, we're getting an indication that noon Eastern time tomorrow, air traffic control should be up and working again tomorrow. Now tonight, we continue to put a human face on this tragedy that unfolds not only in New York City and Washington and Pennsylvania, but also in San Francisco. Several of those airplanes bound for California. Our affiliate in San Francisco, KTVU, has done an interview with a woman by the name of Alice Hoagland. She's a flight attendant. Her son, Mark Bingham, was on board United Airlines Flight 93 today, bound for San Francisco. Apparently, he used the plane's airphone to call his mother in San Francisco shortly before that plane crashed in western Pennsylvania. Among other things, he told his mother that 3 men were on board and they had threatened with a bomb. Hear that interview from KTVU, Alice Hoagland, followed by Kathleen Hoagland, who is the aunt of Mark Bingham on board that flight.
That I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that.
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
I got on the phone, Mark. And he said, hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham. Give me his last name. And he said, I want to let you know that I love you. And I'm flying. I think he said I'm in the air. I'm calling you on the airphone of the airplane.
In his seat.
I presume so. He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, well, who are they, Mark? And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said I don't know who they are. He became distracted there as if someone was speaking to him, and he said it's something to the effect of it's true. And then the phone went dead.
Alice Hoagland, Kathleen Hoagland. Mark Bingham on board United Airlines Flight 93, again, that went down today, with several others in western Pennsylvania. The first of many stories we'll be hearing throughout the evening and into tomorrow and the rest of the week here. Also, the brother of the pilot on American Airlines Flight 11 says he had a, quote, sinking feeling when he heard about this morning's terrorist attacks. Jim Oganowski's brother John was the pilot of the first plane to hit one of the World Trade Centers today. Flight 11 was traveling from Boston, bound for L.A., 92 people on board. Oganowski says his brother was a former Air Force pilot who had just celebrated a birthday.
I ask all of you for your prayers for, as I refer to him, as Brother John. And I ask you to also pray for our whole country today in this tragedy that's impacting our whole country.
Oganowski had a farm in the area of Boston, Massachusetts. Also at this time, we're keeping an eye on Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Why do you ask? Because in Kuala Lumpur, the Petronas Towers are located, extending 1,483 feet into the air, the tallest buildings in the world. The reports we're getting from Malaysia and through the Associated Press is that both towers have been evacuated. Apparently, another threat has been issued against those buildings, but again, there is nothing here to confirm that report. What we do know is that thousands have been led out of those towers and into the streets of Kuala Lumpur. Normally, we would not report a bomb threat, but indeed, given the circumstances of today, certainly that story out of Malaysia is relative. Back in this country, we mentioned tomorrow air traffic control should be operating, according to the White House, up and ready at noon Eastern time tomorrow. But tonight, those airports are a very different scene. I'm going to take you to two of them now. Bill Delaney is at Logan International in Boston, and in Los Angeles at LAX, we have CNN's Frank Buckley. First, though, to Bill in Boston, Massachusetts. Bill, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Bill. Very eerie, of course, here since early this morning. This usually very busy airport, eerily quiet all day. Particular shock, particular impact here in Boston because, of course, the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center originated here in Boston. 157 people in all killed on those planes. Dozens of their family members at a hotel right nearby me here, just outside Logan Airport at the Hilton Hotel here, being counseled. Amid the question, how could two planes have been infiltrated, to all appearances, by hijackers, by terrorists? Now, airport officials here tonight, Bill, insisted that Boston's Logan Airport is as safe as any in the world. But this major airport, like other major airports in the United States, has a history of allegations of lax security, particularly in the late 90s, when the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, did a particular study of Logan, a year and a half, 2 years, in which FAA officials repeatedly dressed as passengers and repeatedly breached security here. They brought guns, they brought even pipe bombs onto planes. They got onto planes locked away on the tarmac. They repeatedly breached security, some 136 violations in the late 90s here during that study, leading to some $178,000 in fines issued against Logan Airport just those couple of years ago. Now, Logan Airport enhanced its security since then. For example, there are some 300 locks that lead from terminals to tarmac here at Logan Airport. 26 of them, it was concluded, were so insecure they were subsequently permanently locked. But this an airport with notorious incidents in its past. 2 summers ago, a teenager dressed as an Hasidic Jew managed to get over a fence here, a fence with razor wire on top of it. He managed to get himself onto a London-bound airplane and made it all the way to London. Now, this airport has also repeatedly found people with possibly dangerous implements on them. The airport was shut down several months ago when a man with a gun that turned out to be harmless, was captured at a checkpoint. But the airport was shut down and people were evacuated. So the airport security here, officials tell us, is very much like security at other airports. And in fact, that FAA study, though they denounced on many levels the security here, said the security here in the late 90s was not all that different than security at many other major airports. Officials here already saying that they will probably end curb check-in here as soon as the airport reopens. They will probably begin more random security checks. 28 million people go through this airport every year. Now the long, hard questioning of how this could have happened at Boston's Logan Airport. Back to you, Bill.
Bill, hang with me a second here. Curious to know your insights on a personal level, knowing that you've covered the Boston area for many years. Outside of the airport itself, what have you noticed about civilian traffic downtown, on the streets, in the stores, etc., through the course of today?
It's of course not on the level of the extraordinary scenes in New York, but this was a different Boston today. Traffic is something that's fundamental to life in Boston. It's always tangled throughout downtown Boston. But today, that changed dramatically. As the day wore on, it got thinner and thinner. Of course, here at the airport itself, that eeriness I described as we began our conversation, Bill, from 10 in the morning or so, people leaving the airport, and by midday, it was completely empty, as the city itself also emptied. Buses and trains, the fares were taken off buses and trains so people could leave work and go home. School children sent home early. All public, state, federal, and city offices closed. So a very different Boston today. I'll leave you with maybe one haunting image that stuck in my mind. At this eerily quiet airport, late in the afternoon, right around dusk, one F-15 jet circling the airport. We've been unable to even figure out exactly from officials here why that jet was out here, but it left an eerie tone to an eerie day in the city of Boston. This one F-15 fighter jet circling again and again Logan Airport.
So very far from normal today. Bill Delaney in Boston. Bill, thank you. To the other end of the country, LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, 3 planes were bound for there today. CNN's Frank Buckley parked outside there this evening. Frank, what's the scene there?
Well, Bill, the same eerie scene that our colleague Delaney is describing there in Boston, the same thing here in Los Angeles, a very eerie scene at a very quiet LAX. As you say, 3 flights were bound for Los Angeles, American 11 from Boston, American 77 from Washington Dulles Airport, and United Airlines Flight 175 also from Boston. None of those planes came here, obviously, to Los Angeles today, but a few people did come to Los Angeles Airport, perhaps to greet friends and family who are going to be getting off those planes, perhaps just to come to get information after hearing of the tragedies. They came, they were understandably shaken up. We will spare you the intrusion into their private grief. We will not show you that video, but we will show you the view inside of LAX as it was being evacuated. As the airport was being closed today, they also evacuated not just the American and United Airlines terminals, but also the Bradley International Terminal. In fact, all of the terminals were evacuated here at LAX. LAX was closed, no flights in or out, and that affected thousands of passengers. On an average day, there are some 160,000 passengers on 2,100 flights that go in and out of this airport. By this afternoon, however, LAX was completely empty, except for the security personnel and key personnel that were needed to keep the facility operating. Those thousands of passengers stranded by all of this were still searching for hotel rooms late into the day. I was talking to a hotel manager nearby who was telling me the story of seeing pathetic scenes of passengers pushing those yellow carts with their luggage up Century Boulevard right near the airport, going from hotel to hotel trying to get accommodations. As far as we know, most or all of them have found some sort of accommodations. We've talked to some hotel managers who've told us that the airlines have provided for those accommodations for some of the people here. We do know that only one flight arrived into LAX this evening after the airport was closed down. The FAA confirming that a lone American flight was allowed to come in at 6:30 p.m. local time to assist in the grief effort here at LAX. Bill?
Frank, and quickly here, don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know you've covered the LA area. Bill Delaney was relaying some of the concerns at Boston's Logan International Airport about security concerns there. Have there been concerns at LAX as well?
Well, there have been at times, and we've had situations here over the years in which people have somehow breached security, gone through the metal detector, and they've had to actually evacuate an entire terminal of of the airport and getting everyone out of the terminal because someone had somehow gone through the metal detection system. They felt that there was a security alert there, and by the time the personnel had caught up with that person was gone. So yes, there have been concerns along those lines over the years, even here at LAX.
All right, Frank, and again, as the White House is indicating, they expect air traffic control to be operating again tomorrow at noon Eastern time, which means 9 a.m. West Coast time. So, Frank, it is quite possible LAX could get back to some sense of normalcy by your time tomorrow morning. Frank Buckley in LA, Bill Delaney in Boston. Now Wolf Blitzer again in Washington, D.C. Wolf.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I want to bring in 3 experts on national security now who have been monitoring today's dramatic developments. Here in Washington, Senator Chris Dodd, he's chairman of the Senate Rules Committee, but he's also a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In Los Angeles, the former Secretary of State Warren Christopher, who served during the first term of the Clinton administration. And also here in Washington, Jim Steinberg, the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Clinton. Now, let me begin with you, Senator Dodd. When we spoke on Sunday, when I interviewed you on Sunday on Late Edition, you made the point that the President's National Missile Defense Shield was not really targeted at the real threat facing the United States. What you said you worried much more about was a terrorist attack against a U.S. target, specifically in New York. Was someone asleep at the switch?
Well, look, tonight we're going to worry about these families. The human dimension, the loss is staggering. The President, everyone's going to rally behind. Obviously, we want to go after the people responsible, do it in a responsible way. Even those who may be harboring these people, as the President said tonight, he'll have total support, in my view, from Congress. Obviously, there are questions that have to be raised here about this. You've had this today, somewhere between 15 and 20 terrorists commandeer 4 aircraft and 3 airports and attack 2 major targets in the United States. How does that happen? And today is not the day to raise that question specifically, but certainly that will be a question raised by people across the country and as we talk with people at our intelligence agencies. The issue of a national missile defense is an important debate. I happen to be one who believes there's a rationale for investing research dollars in that area, but it's a lower priority in my view, and I think this view is shared by many of my colleagues in Congress, many Democrats and some Republicans who believe that there's a higher degree of danger that we face from the very kind of thing we saw today, that we've seen on recent terrorist attacks. So while we support the idea of some research in missile defense, this nation faces a far greater threat from the kind of tragedy that we witnessed in New York and Washington.
Secretary Christopher, once the U.S. government learns specifically who is responsible for these attacks today against targets here in the United States, what should President Bush do?
Well, you obviously have to take very strong action. Wolf, I think we have to focus not only on the direct perpetrators, but those who support them, as well as perhaps those who give a place to them. The United States cannot sit back and just try to find out who the people on the firing line here in the United States were. We have to find out where the support came from, who might be harboring them in the future. I worry a little bit that the bin Laden solution is too glib, too easy for us. We have to get deeper. We have to drill down and find out what has really happened here, what violated our security, why we had so little intelligence about this. We have a whole big issues ahead of us. All of the old issues, I think, are going to fade until we resolve this particular problem.
Jim Steinberg, you were President Clinton's Deputy National Security Advisor at the time of the Twin Embassy bombings in East Africa, for which the U.S. retaliated against targets associated with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, as well as that factory in Sudan. It doesn't seem to have done much good if, in fact, Osama bin Laden's operation was, in fact, responsible for today's attacks.
Well, we still don't know who's responsible, but I think that what we've learned is that you can't deal with this in terms of just a single military strike or a single shot. This is a long-term effort. We didn't stop the embassy bombing in the Africas, but we were able to thwart a number of other efforts by groups like Osama bin Laden, as we saw around the time of the millennium. This is going to be a day-in and day-out kind of effort. We have to develop the intelligence sources. We have to work with other countries to make sure that there is no support for these kinds of efforts. But we're going to be in this for a long haul, because this is the major threat facing our country.
And Senator Dodd, what do you recommend that President Bush do? The same question I asked Secretary Christopher. If the U.S. knows definitively who is responsible and who may have been protecting that terror operation. What should the United States do in terms of military retaliation?
Well, I think the former secretary has it right, and I think you've heard others talk about it here today, and that is, first of all, assure the American public, which he did tonight. I commend the President for his speech. Tomorrow the Congress will rally behind him. This nation will speak with one voice in these coming days. He ought to take advantage of the offers that have been made by President Putin and others, allies, competitors around the globe that care about this kind of an issue, build the coalition in support, and as Jim Steinberg has just said and others have pointed out today, this is not a silver bullet solution where one raid, one attack against one group by bin Laden or others is going to solve the problem. This is a systemic response we've got to organize in the weeks and months and years ahead if we're going to ultimately defeat terrorism, and I hope the President will do that.
Secretary Christopher, very briefly, you've been around. Before we go to Secretary Christopher, our Bill Hemmer is in Atlanta. He has some additional news he wants to report. Bill, share that information with us.
Yeah, Wolf, thank you, and I apologize for the interruption, but CNN's Deborah Favorick by telephone now on the George Washington Bridge. New Yorkers know it as the GW Bridge, with a breaking story there about a vehicle or possibly a truck that may have been loaded with explosives inside. Deborah, what are you finding out? Deborah Favorick, Bill Hemmer, CNN Center, Atlanta. Can you hear me? All right, clearly in the interest of live television, we're having a difficult time establishing our connection with Deborah, but we will try and hang on at this point. Deborah, can you hear me? Bill Hemmer in Atlanta. All right, 3 times does not work. Apparently difficulties with the cell phone there, but what we're getting right now through the Associated Press and through Deborah Favorick at this time right now that, I'm sorry, Steve, give it to me again. Okay, we're getting a report through the Associated Press that there are cell phone calls being made from those possibly trapped inside the World Trade Center. Again, we're getting that report through CNN's Deborah Favorick, also through sources of the Associated Press. We're going to try and establish that telephone line. We don't mean to frustrate our viewers, but clearly at this time, we're trying to getting it just as much as you are at this time. Let's go back to Washington and let Wolf continue for a moment. Then we'll come back and straighten things out here. We'll get our facts straight, get our telephone line established. But for now, back to D.C. and Wolf.
All right, thanks, Bill. I want to bring back Secretary Christopher, who's old enough to give us some perspective, historic perspective, on this day in American history. There's been a lot of comparisons to Pearl Harbor, which you, of course, lived through. What is your sense of this day?
This is a tough day for America. Wolf, I think we need to be